And good morning, Birds fans. How are you on this fine Tuesday morning? You got your Mac guys, John McMullen and Jody McDonald, here to hang with you today to talk about the 10-1 Philadelphia Eagles. Yes, we're going to talk about a bunch of things over the course of the next 2 hours. But remember, always come back to 10-1, whether the Eagles have played a tough enough schedule,
10-1
they have with the team and the other teams around the National Football League, either playing well or playing. Bottom line is Philadelphia Eagles, the only 10-1 team in the National Football League. Remember, it always does come back to that. Quick aside, Johnny Mac, before we get this going, because I do want to put this on a table with the Birds 365 guys, because I did elsewhere. I did a couple of fill-in shows. We were off here. Thanks very much to the Krause clan for allowing us the holidays, Thursday and Friday, a good meal for both John and myself, and some extra time to be able to make some extra money working elsewhere for yours truly. So I did a couple of CBS Sports Radio shows. So when you're on during the day on CBS Sports Radio, you have to write CBS Sports Minutes, which air in the other stations around the country. Odyssey has umpteen sports radio stations all across the country, including WIP being one of them. And you have to write a 30-second commentary. They tie it to a commercial, and they air it across the entire country on the other sports outlets. And one I did this week when filling in for Bill Ryder was the fact that we live in a power rankings NFL world.
I don't like that
hand
world.
Up, guilty
I don't
as
like
charged.
it.
I know you don't like them. I don't really like them either, because I think that anyone who doesn't have the Philadelphia Eagles number one is kidding themselves and or making a bad mistake. And yes, I let them get under my skin too much, and shame on me. I shouldn't. But the power rankings, people get overly excised about them, and I point the finger at myself. We don't need power ratings in the NFL. There's a very good reason for that. In college football, in the next couple of weeks, a group will subjectively select what four teams are going to play for a national championship. And that's the way they have to do it. It's better than the way they used to have it with the polls. I appreciate the playoff committee's makeup and the people that are in charge of that, but it's still subjective. The NFL doesn't have that. They've got this great things called the standings. And even within the standings, they've got very defined tiebreakers that you know what you have to achieve to be able to make the postseason. So what Jody McDonald thinks, or John McMullen thinks, or Connor Orr thinks, or anybody from ESPN or The Ringer or CBS, whatever, think is nice and it's fun and we'll have fun talking about it and debating it, it means squatta. The only thing that matters is the standings. And that's why I say that, because remember, always come back to, and the Philadelphia Eagles are 10-1. Anything else we break down today and talk about the special teams and injuries and everything else is all part of it. But the bottom line still is that the Eagles are 10-1. And John, I look at the rest of their schedule. This team is winning a minimum of 14 games. Do you think they can actually lose 3 out of their last 6?
Yes, but only if they decide. Only if they have things wrapped up and decide to rest late in the season.
Do you think they have? Do you think with 2 games to go, they'll have everything wrapped up?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, if you think about Christmas Eve would be the one game. If Dallas can somehow get close enough to make that meaningful, that's the only way. Probably 17 and 18, game 17, week 17 and 18 mean anything, to be honest. So it's unlikely, but if they're playing the junior varsity, yeah, they might get an extra loss. So I'm not even concerned about that. The actual number, what you pointed out, yeah, they've been the best team in football. They're 10-1. They're only the only 10-1 team, and they have the inside pole position to get to the finish line with the number 1 seed, which is the goal. and it's more important than ever. It's always important, but ever since they shifted the extra playoff team, and now you only have one bye instead of two, getting that first seed is more meaningful than ever.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what it's all about. And they're in a position to do it. So how they do it is not really relevant, just as long as they do it. And to me, if you get by Christmas Eve and you're in that number one seed, it's probably over. And then you can start talking about rest, and we'll have all those discussions, rest versus rust, and how do you keep guys at an optimal level, because you're going to have the extra week, and we're going to have all those conversations. But those conversations are good to have, Jody. That means you're really, really good.
Exactly. Now, but here's the thing. If they put it away by Christmas Eve, that means they probably won that game against the Cowboys.
Yeah.
So even if they go the JV route for games 16 and 17, week 17 and 18, you think that they'll have lost some game before that? Either the Titans this week or the Giants the week
I could
after?
see them losing. Yeah, I could see them losing this game. I could see them losing a game. I can't see them losing to the Giants. Now, division games.
And by the way, and I apologize for interrupting. And man, you were more right about this than I was. I'm admitting defeat on this one. Week 17 is the Saints. And you and I split on the Saints this year. I thought the Saints could be competitive. I put too much hope in Jameis Winston actually returning to form. I thought the Saints could actually be a playoff contender for a wild card. And between you and I, as bad as they are, and they're bad, they're still an actual playoff contender, because that division stinks on ice, the NFC South, but they could be eliminated by that point. You think the Saints are going to bring anything in here to Philadelphia in week 17? I think
no.
I think Eagles JV could beat them.
That's possible. I mean, you bring up Jameis Winston. I mean, one of the reasons I didn't believe in the Saints was the two biggest reasons were I don't believe in the head coach, and I don't believe in the quarterback. And I don't think you move on from a Hall of Fame quarterback and Drew Brees. It's been a couple years, but I'm talking about the impact it has on the organization, and a potential Hall of Fame coach in Sean Payton. And it's like, no issues here. I mean, you're going to have some issues, and they've had some issues. But one of the biggest issues is the quarterback, and the fact that even though I don't believe in Jameis Winston all that much, he's better than stinking Andy Dalton. And they have, I don't, just bad decision making, bad organization. And when you have bad organizations and bad decision making, and I think Sean Payton was the one steering the ship in the right direction all those years, not Mickey Loomis, and now he's off in his own devices. So yeah, they could beat him even with the JV, but anytime you're playing the JV, you can also lose to anybody. So that's one of those things where, Gardner Minshew's a capable backup, but that means maybe he plays well one week, maybe he plays well, maybe he doesn't play as well the next week. And it's tough to rest for 2 games. I mean, are you really going to rest for 2 games?
Which
I don't know if he can do that either.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because if you put away the best overall record, you got that buy in there too. So that you really want to take your star players off the field for 3 consecutive weeks.
That's probably too much. So, I mean, the number, they're going to get to the number. I'm not concerned about the number, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'm really not. To me, this is a game that's upcoming. This is a losable game. Tennessee. What does Tennessee do well? In theory, that's what the Eagles don't do as well. So, when we always talk about styles make fights, this is a team stylistically that could give the Eagles trouble. And I'm talking about the Tennessee Titans, and they're probably not happy after losing again to Cincinnati at home. Very tight, close game, and that's how they usually play. That's how they have to play. And it's probably going to come down to the fourth quarter here, and it's probably going to be a tight game. Play this way, play that way, shifts things. This is a tough game for the Eagles. But I got to tell you, if they get through Tennessee, you know me, I'm not a fan of the Giants. I think they've been doing it with mirrors. I give Brian Daboll a ton of credit. Chicago, I think, is in ship down mode. I think they're really, going to be very cautious with Justin Fields, and he's all they have, basically. I don't know if they could beat him with Justin Fields, never mind without him. Obviously, you have Dallas and then New Orleans and the Giants again. Yeah, they're set up, man. But this is the game. This is the game to me. If they win this game, Jody, they're going to be the number 1 seed in the NFC.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
And it's an AFC game. It doesn't even matter that much in the standings, but
right.
This is the game to me, because this is the one team that they probably don't match up as well with as the other teams. Now, Dallas is a good football team. Eagles fans don't want to hear it. That's a good team. That's a good team. They're going to be in the playoffs. They're probably not going to win the NFC East. We'll see. We know Mike McCarthy's history in the playoffs. We know Dallas's history in the playoffs. But don't sleep on that Dallas team. That's a good team.
Agree on that. And I do want to expand on Dallas in a second. But first things first about the rest of the Eagles' schedule. Oh, when they play Chicago, Justin Fields will be questionable. They had him questionable this week. That was one of the few picks I got right because a buddy gave me some information on Saturday afternoon, I think it was, because at the time, Chicago was still saying Justin Fields was questionable, that he might start the game against the Jets. And I got a source in Chicago who told me there's no stinking way that Justin Fields sees the field on set. It's not happening, Jody. No, don't even listen to what the Bears are officially saying on the record. He's not playing. Within hours, they announced that they had elevated Nathan Peterson from their practice squad, and then they had the whole kerfuffle on Sunday. Supposedly, Trevor Siemian got hurt in warmups, so Peterson was going to start, and then shockingly, game starts, and Siemian's fine, and he's actually starting. So Chicago's trying to take a page out of Nick Sirianni's playbook of getting a competitive advantage by not giving out any information on their team and or blatantly lying about their team might be more accurate way to describe it. So when they get to the Chicago week, Justin Fields will be questionable. We won't officially know whether he's going to play or not until that game day. Speaking of the coach of the Eagles, he met with you guys yesterday via Zoom. I asked you yesterday if you thought we would have any new information on the Eagles' injuries. At least Nick Sirianni sung the praises of Jordan Davis, says he's rehabbing real hard. As far as putting a timeline on it, no chance, no shot. Wasn't happening, didn't happen, right?
No. And I'm to be honest, the biggest one to me is C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Because Reed Blankenship played well. There's no question. I'm surprised how well he played, and I'm very happy that they gave him the opportunity. And a couple of weeks ago, he kind of passed Kayvon Wallace in that dime package, which isn't very noticeable because the Eagles don't play it that much, only a couple snaps a game. But Kayvon had not been playing well when given his opportunities, and Reed did a really good job. I think, and matter of fact, I think Pro Football Focus graded him their best defender in that game, believe it or not. So he played really well in a really difficult spot. But that's one of those things where, maybe you persevere in game with an injury, but the longer you go, it becomes an issue. So that one is big to me because the Eagles don't have great depth there, with all due respect to what I said about Reed Blankenship. Now, with Jordan Davis, they went out and got Linval Joseph. They went out and got Ndamukong Suh. So I'm not as concerned about, I want to see him back, healthy, but you can take some time. And by the way, he looked fine when I saw him. Was jogging, and um, so he looks close. But they've been able to get personnel to make up for his absence at least a little bit. Um, with Dallas Goedert, and I add him and Devonta Maddox and now C.J. Gardner Johnson. It's not the same. It's not the case. And Nick praised Jack Stoll. Um, you know, did a nice job. Everybody did a nice job in the running game, right? 363 yards. Everybody contributed to the running game. But I think I just talked about Reed. PFF had him as their worst offensive player, Jack Stoll. So there's a big drop off from Dallas Goedert. We know that. There's a big drop off from Devonta Maddox. We know that. It's a big drop off with C.J. Gardner Johnson. Those to me are the bigger issues because the Eagles they haven't been able to go out and get somebody off the couch like Linval Joseph to play slot corner or safety or tight end. So
let me share with you a call that I got on WIP. I worked last night on WIP, and an Eagle fan wanted to know, Jody, is there a guy like Linval Joseph, like Ndamukong Suh, who's sitting at home, who can come in here and cure the Eagles' ills on special teams? That there is Mr. Special Team who's just sitting at home waiting to be picked up off the scrap heap, and you plug him in, and all of a sudden the Eagles' special teams issues will be over and done with. Then, so you could probably guess I told the caller, please share that name with me. If you know who he is, I'll get McMullen to give it to his boy Michael Clay to lobby for Howie Roseman to make the call and get him in here. That guy doesn't exist. There isn't a special teams guru just waiting to jump into the Eagles and fix. No. Yesterday, Nick Sirianni did talk about it and said there are some things that they're considering, that maybe there's someone on the practice team that they could plug in. I think that's highly doubtable. I think if they had that person, they would have done it already. The maybe will elevate some of our starters, regular offense or defensive player, more likely defense player, specifically on a coverage team, to fill a void, to grab a spot on a coverage team. You usually want to stay away from that because the last thing you want to do is get someone hurt. The Eagles are, despite the fact that you're talking about the injuries that they have and how they're trying to deal with it, they're still, I would say, one of the above average teams as far as games lost for players this year. They've either had some luck and or the way that they coach and use their players have worked for them. They have not been hurt nearly as bad as other teams in the NFL. So I think they'll probably stay away from that. Or am I wrong? Because it's bad, John. The Eagles special teams are on coverage. They're ranked dead last, 32nd out of 32 teams in the National Football League.
Yeah.
They're giving up the most yardage on returns. Will they do something as drastic as ask one of their regulars who haven't been playing special teams to jump into the mix for the last 6 games of the season?
Probably not, because the guys who would do it have already done it, like Marcus Epps occasionally. Was on special teams. Yeah.
I know, by the way, Epps would probably not be considered because if you don't have Johnson, you don't want to risk Epps. No. You're already down a safety.
That's what I mean. I mean, Marcus plays every, back in the day, Malcolm Jenkins was the guy, he'd play every snap and he'd play on special teams and he'd want to play on special teams and he would demand the play on special teams. Marcus already does that. Marcus plays on special teams, not not like a core guy, but he plays on enough special teams, and that's been consistent. And he plays every snap on defense. I don't see that guy on the roster. That's the problem. The hope was, there's a lot of talk about Cameron Johnson in college. And he was a great special teams player. My names I always throw out are Chris Maragos and Brian Brayman, because I think there's something to players that are good on special teams and maybe don't help you as much as you'd like from a defensive or offensive perspective in the case of those guys defensive, but they're so valuable that you carve out roster spots for them. The Eagles haven't done that. They haven't tried to find that player, or if they have tried to find that player, they haven't found that player, one or the other. And they're trying to make do, and it hasn't worked, Jody. I mean, as you mentioned, this is, and I was just looking at it, the Eagles remain 13 categories in PFF. Eagles are the number one team overall. Kansas City's number 2. We talk about power ranking. San Francisco's number 3. I think everything is settling where it should at the top. Special teams, you go over to that category. Washington is number 1. Tennessee, number 2. Those Houston Texans are number 3. 32, Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, dead last.
Well, you know what? Would you rather be 10-1 and 32 or 1-9-1 and number 3?
Here's the only caveat you have to put on it, John. And I'm sorry, Eagle fans, not going to want to hear this. Last year, NFC divisional game in Green Bay. Green Bay Packers lost. Why?
Yep.
Special teams.
Special teams.
So we can sit here and, like I was saying at the top of the show, the minimum games now that I think the Eagles are going to win is 14. And that's even with giving 1 up. I won't say 2 because if they get 2, then they might win their next 4 and just throw the JV out there for the next 2 and go, hey, we don't really care, which means they'd still win 14 games. And 14-3 is phenomenal. But if special teams jumps up and bite you in the butt in your first playoff game, we're all going to scream bloody murder in 2020 hindsight. How did they not fix special teams? So that's why I have to put it in a separate category and not say just, oh, the Eagles win anyway. No. They might, and they could continue to, but sometimes special teams just comes up and it bites you in the rear end at the worst possible times, which for the Eagles would be the playoffs. So I can't just cover it all up with, but the Eagles are 10-1.
No, what you can say is the Eagles have won. They have won despite poor special teams to this point. It might jump up at the worst time, as you mentioned, with Green Bay is the perfect example because it just happened last season. Yep. They completely dominated that game for people that now it was a bad weather game. It was cold. It was all that. The offense didn't do. Other things have to work in concert as well, sort of like the Washington loss. Exactly. Everybody talks about they can't stop the running game, the time of possession. Everybody talked about that in Washington game, but a big part of the Washington game was also the fact that they played tempo as they usually do. They had too many 3-and-outs. So it was all in concert, and there are a bunch of other special teams.
The biggest one of them all. They turned the ball over 4 times. Yeah. 3 if you want to discount the Deshaun Watson backwards pass on the last play of the game that the ex-Eagle picked up and scored it. But they lost a turnover battle. They never lose the turnover battle. They got beat that week, giving the ball away 3 times.
Yeah, and that was the Quez Watkins play.
Dallas Goedert face mask.
Yeah, and the injury. Everything was working in concert to the point that when you get to that, then something crazy can happen and you can lose to a football game. That's sort of what happened to Green Bay in that game as well. They're still winning. They're still winning. They're winning, but they're not playing well. They should have put that team away long before that, and all of a sudden, here's the block punt, game over. They're done. That's the kind of thing that scares you on a particular game day. And if anything's going to do it to the Eagles, it's going to be special teams. And Nick Sirianni is very big on, and I advocate this, Jody. And he's a CEO coach, and I think that's the way to do it. And I think more people should look at the way Nick does it, and they're going to start to replicate that when they look at head coaches. But he is a true CEO head coach. He gave up play calling when something's not going well on the defensive side. He takes the blame from it when something's not going wrong with the special teams, and he did that. But they got to fix this. They got to fix this because they stink at it. And it's something every week. It's been consistently bad every week, whether you go all the way back to week 2 and the block field goal, and, they end up winning that game easily. But boy, if they return that for a touchdown, if you remember that, all of a sudden they're right back in that game. You don't know what happens. That was kind of the start of it. And every week it's been something. Last week it was the kickoff return was absurd. The guy's taking it out from 8 yards deep. Every team in the NFL is like, we'll take the 25. We'll take the 25. We'll take the 25. Not against the Eagles. Take it out. And again, that's not Cordero Patterson. That's just some guy. And the Eagles made a big deal out of, wow, he's a good returner. Well, he looked like a good returner. I don't know if he's doing that every week.
He was a good returner this past Sunday, yes.
Yeah.
How about prior to?
Yeah, exactly.
Setting the world on fire.
It's they've had some issues on special teams, and they've been so good it gets lost in the sauce a little bit. And so if you go through, and I'm looking at the numbers now, Jody, if you go through the 12 games, and I told you all those categories that PFF looks at the film, there have been 2 acceptable games on special teams. 2 acceptable games. Week 1, Detroit, and at Arizona. That's it. Everything else has been bad.
All right, then let me ask you this one, because if we take those games where they've actually been okay and point them and say, hey, here's when they could have been good, doesn't bode well for the rest of the season. Both of those games were indoors, and chances are Jake Elliott was able to boom them as best they can. Next game will actually be played in December, when it, just judging track record and history, it'll be even colder. You never know with Mother Nature, but the way it's worked for like thousands of years, the later we get in the calendar, the colder it gets. And Jake Elliott did kick one 7 yards deep into the end zone last week, and the Packers still brought it out because they feel that they could return it against the Eagles, and they're proven to be right. Can Jake Elliott get more distance on his kickoffs? I don't know where to look that up. Maybe you do, how many touchbacks he's had, or if there's even a greater demarcation as to how deep kicks actually go. I don't know where they would list that, or if they even have a category for that. But my off the top of the head feel is he's not bad at it. It's not like kicks are coming down at the 5, but there are some kickers in this league that ahead of time, as soon as they put the ball on the tee, why is he going to kick it through the back of the end zone? You're not even going to give them a choice, that they're not going to have the chance. Would that be something that the Eagles would consider? That I don't know. Maybe there is actually someone on the street who can kick it through the uprights off a tee from the 30-yard line, and you just say, do it, big guy. Just boot it out of there, and we'll start from the 25 every single time. How is Jake at the distance of his kickoffs, if you know?
He's what you described. He's okay. He's kind of middle of the road. He's not one of those guys who, can just boom it out of the back of the end zone at will. And there are guys like that. And you never want to carry 2 kickers. If Evan Cepas could do it, it would be great. Just boom it to the back of the end zone as a kickoff. But he's not that guy as well. So, yeah, you can't carry 2 kickers on your game day roster just to kick it out of the end zone, unfortunately. When you're this good, though, you start thinking about it and saying, because you can get somebody. There are guys who can that's all they can do, but they have no ability to kick field goals. Their accuracy is terrible, but they can just boot it to where. typically when you get it 7 yards deep, like I said, teams are giving up. They want to 25 at that point. They want to 25. So that's the scary. And again, I always bring up, I'm a Patterson guy. He's the best kickoff returner I've ever seen. Now, Cordero, because I was, let him go wherever against anybody. If it's 9 yards deep, he does it all the time. He'll go. And I have no problem with it. Everybody else, no, you shut it down. If it's even 3 yards deep, you take the 25. The fact that kid was taking it out from 7, 8 yards deep, that was the biggest indictment of this kickoff coverage you could ever have, because nobody does that, Jody. Nobody does that.
Except for Cordell Patterson. You're right. Yeah. He's the only one who does.
Yeah. And that to me was the biggest indictment. And I'm sure Nick Sirianni knows that. I'm sure that was a wake-up call, because they were probably like, are you kidding me? And they not only did it, they were successful.
Yeah, the special teams is something we'll continue to talk about unless they make a change and or unless it gets significantly better. He's John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. Only one guest lined up today. That would be in hour number 2. Our buddy from NBC Sports Philadelphia, Dave Zingaro, going to jump in the fray. When we come back, Johnny Mac, I've got a question for you about the MVP status in the National Football League. I talked about this last night a little bit on WIP, crunch some numbers. I'm a little surprised by at least one betting outlet's odds on the MVP. I want to get your take on it and talk about the Philadelphia Eagles potentially having the most valuable player in the National Football League. He's Mac, I'm Mac. It's Mac and Mac right here on Birds 365.